Hi, welcome to The Juice, the ADHD-friendly podcast that skips the small talk and gets straight to the good stuff.
Real talk, no fluff.
You were saying earlier about some of the things that you really can't stand, which is ADHD, is when people talk really slow. So I was really going to fuck with you. It's really slowly today.
Usually I slurp your coffee.
And then slur out coffee, which I do apparently.
Do you?
Yeah, according to my daughter. Yeah. So I'm going to start slurring. If you're pissing me off, I'm going to start talking slow.
Slurry the coffee. Oh my gosh, slow drivers. Same thing as slow. Yeah, it's just like,
Yeah.
get to the fucking point, go. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks so much for coming on. Because obviously we've been friends for a long time, so you know me really well. If you're leading someone who's neurodivergent, or perhaps you are a leader, because I know I've had a lot of people in very demanding positions reach out to me. If you have anything to say around that.
I have spoken also to a lot of leaders who have been diagnosed with ADHD later in life. You know, if I'm doing some coaching with them or in a leadership program, on one sense, it's a relief and it changes their life for the better, but also it can be pretty confronting. So if you're in, a high pressured role, you're in a leadership role, it can be a lot to put on top of what is already a really demanding job. For me, it's around helping leaders lead better. And it's almost 100% that a leader will lead somebody who's neurodivergent, right? And so there are some really simple do's and don'ts when it comes to leading people who are neurodivergent. Funnily enough, they're kind of the same things that make good leadership anyway. And the first is making sure that you're providing real clarity when it comes to tasks. And I'm not talking about micromanaging, but it can be something as simple as, giving clear goals, making sure that you're really defining the priorities, maybe some written follow-ups, getting really clear up front about what good looks like. So that whole vagueness can be really, well, it's challenging for anybody, but I think particularly for someone who has ADHD or is neurodivergent. And I think the other thing to be aware of is to reduce cognitive load. And what I mean by that is chunking a really big task into smaller tasks rather than just overwhelming. It can be as simple as giving an agenda before the meeting, right? I think the worst thing you can do is just rock up and go, this is what we're going to do. And the other thing is, and this once again is really important for leadership anyway, is how can you provide as much flexibility as you can in terms of how they carry out the work, how people carry out the work, right? It might be providing quiet spaces, enabling them to really have some input as to how the work gets done. Asynchronous comms, for example, is another thing. So a lot of these are really basic good leadership traits. Build trust with that person. That's your first priority. Have some conversations with them early up front when you're leading them about how do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to communicate? What really gets your goat? When are you on fire? When do you do your best work? And what actually stops you from doing that? So it is really that getting to know how they prefer to work. What are their strengths? I think that's another thing.
Yes, definitely. Well, so much more so for someone with ADHD. Totally. We doing boring things is so painful, and it's really difficult to do the stuff that we don't like. Yeah, well, we're not good at. So identifying strengths is so much more important. I mean, it's like you say, this is all just basic leadership stuff, right?
But it's really doing anyway. Yeah. But it becomes even more important. And just on that strengths, I know that certainly I think ADHD and other neurodivergences can bring some incredible unique strengths to the workplace. Creativity, hyperfocus, that can be a really good thing. Problem solving, thinking outside the square, thinking outside the box and these are all skills that are so needed in our organizations. And so I think it is really about, as you say, identifying the strengths and getting them to work from those strengths more over time versus their non-strengths.
If you are working to your strengths and feeling good, you are less likely to experience ADHD burnout. I wanted to talk about whether you should tell people or not.
What we know from the research, and I talk about this in my book, Beyond Burnout, if you work from your strengths, anybody, it actually acts as a buffer against burnout. Identify your strengths, and that's not just what you're good at, it's what you're good at and what you really enjoy doing. So there's that definition. So for people who who have ADHD, or someone who's leading somebody who's got ADHD, that becomes even more important, not only for performance and engagement, but burnout prevention. The questions that I would ask is, what is the culture of the organisation when it comes to neurodiversity and just an inclusive culture? So if you're working for an organisation and you've seen evidence through the culture that they are really committed in living and breathing diversity and inclusion, I think you're more likely for that to be a safe thing. But secondly, I would say it depends on the relationship that you have with your direct manager. We know that that's everything. We know that has a huge case. And so I would say try and build trust with that person. I would love to say that you could rock up even in the recruitment process. I mean, I think that would be my ideal, is that it's not something that anybody has to hide.
No, that's right. I think that was where I was coming from, because for me, when I went through the diagnosis process, there was so much to take on, and there was a little bit of like, well, I don't know if I really want to tell
Yeah.
my work colleagues. What's happened is it's been exactly the same as telling my friends.
Yeah.
Where everybody's like, yeah, well, no shit. Like, we've already knew that. Like, hello, like, it's no surprise. Like, you're like,
Totally. We knew that.
everybody knows now.
It's like my friend who said, "Oh, you're coming out. I'm gay." I'm like, "No shit, shit. Like, we kind of knew that." I think it would be a great. I agree. I think. I would encourage as much as possible that you can, but I do know that some people may feel cautious about that. So if you are like, "Oh, well, this doesn't feel psychologically safe to do that," particularly if you're in a new role, maybe talk about it, to start by telling someone who you trust. But I think it would be great if we could just go, "Yep, I am." Because I think that helps the leader. It helps you.
helps everybody.
Helps everybody, your team members, everything,
Exactly. Yeah. And it kind of helps to make sense of everything that's been going on. So, how I work for years, I have amazing ideas, but so many. And it's very difficult sometimes to condense them down into priorities and to actually get done what needs to be done by these certain dates.
One of the things that I've really enjoyed as a client of yours and as a friend, but let's just talk in the work sense, understanding your diagnosis, it makes me understand the way you work much better. Like, for example, you are always coming up with the most incredible ideas, and they are so awesome. Like, I'm often going, "Yeah, grab that, I'll grab that, let's do that." But then often you're like, off to the next thing. And I'm going, where was that? And just knowing that has made me think, oh, I know this is what Amy's doing, right? It's not like I sort of understand you better. If you say, this is what we need to do, what I can do to help you out. Like, I can send you an email rather than just saying, can you send me something? Because that'll be.
Yeah, exactly. Else. Yeah. Yeah, or just let's have a look at the calendar, what's coming up next month, and these are what we need by when. And as Richard said, I think it was the second episode, wasn't it, Richard? I can't remember. Who's doing what?
He's doing what for whom by
For whom by when? Who's doing what for whom by when? And that is so important. For me, I have to look at the calendar and see, oh, that's due by that date or whatever's coming up, in order to stay on track.
That also works with my son. He's on the autism spectrum and he's 23, lives in Christchurch. And just the other night, he was so pissed off because I'd said to him, I'm coming down sometime in December, which for me is like, yeah, I'll let you know in a couple of weeks. He's like, oh, I need to know. Tell Mum I need to know the specific date and the specific time because I've got a very busy schedule. This wouldn't worry me, but actually it's not about me. It's about how do you like to communicate, right? And how does he like to communicate?
No, it's the intention behind it too. So if you have that understanding, so you know that he's on the autism spectrum, therefore he will need to, it won't make change.
No.
Will struggle with a change of plans.
Yeah.
My son Finn is on has autism, and any changes and sudden changes in plans are very difficult.
Yeah.
Just knowing that as a leader.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, what would be really good is that helps you lead in a way that is going to get the best out of people, and also what you can do to avoid that, or if there is sudden change, because sometimes that happens in organisations and in business, you can better support that person and understand sometimes if there is a reaction to a sudden change that happens, that it's not that they have a personality flaw or anything like that. It's just that people react differently.
What I've noticed, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is that there are so many people, particularly who are struggling, feeling so alone and isolated, confronted by going through the diagnosis process. What should people do, regarding the workplace?
Well, what I wouldn't do is go it alone. Trying to just suck it up and go it on your own is not going to be helpful. So I would say, who within your organization can you share this with? It could be a mentor within the organization. It could be your boss. It could be HR. Often I think that the people function can be really helpful, hopefully, to say that this is what's going on and what support that you need. The other thing I would say is most organizations, most medium to large organizations, and even some small offer EAP services and free counseling, right? This would be a perfect opportunity to take advantage of that. If you are a leader, I think that you have an opportunity to share your journey with others. If you have the courage to be vulnerable and share your own journey with the diagnosis, that sends a message to other people in the organisation who aren't as high up on the hierarchy that it's actually okay and it's normal, and it destigmatizes it. So if you've got the courage to do it, imagine if a senior executive or a CEO was to say, look, actually, guess what? I've just been diagnosed and this is what I'm finding. Suddenly people in that organisation who might be going through that or have wondered are going to feel more safe and less alone.
Because when I announced about my podcast, it was in our weekly meeting, with the whole company. Most weeks, you go around the circle, everybody gives an update, and I'm just like, pass. And so I shared it. I felt really nervous, which was quite strange for me. A little bit sort of,
What were you worried about? What were you nervous about?
That's a good question. I think there's still a bit of, sort of shame or something around it. Destigmatizing it is so important because you do feel like there's something wrong with you. It is a very vulnerable thing to do, sharing it, because when you have ADHD, you have RSD most likely, which is Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, which means that you're constantly thinking everybody's mad at you, you've done something wrong, you're going to lose your job. If your boss says, can I see you in 5 minutes? That is the worst nightmare for someone with ADHD. Can you call me? I'm like, why? So you can fire me? Like, what have I done wrong? You always think you're in trouble. And that's because by the age of 10, you've had 20,000 times more criticisms than a neurotypical person. So that's being programmed into someone with ADHD, that you inherently feel like a bit of a wrong. Yeah. And like you're always going to, something bad's going to happen, or you've done something wrong. And it's like, we need to change that. And that's what the gift is of the diagnosis process. It's such a gift because you can make sense of it and say, well, actually, no.
I'm just simply feeling, when you said that, I just feel, I don't know, as your friend of your sadness, that has been your experience. And it's quite I will never just call you and say, hey, can you call me? Well, they've actually, that I'm your friend. But
it's fine, we do it.
But I just suddenly, that's quite an epiphany for me. And I would say for leaders is that's what your constant worry is. What you called again?
Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, or RSD. And so just to be aware as a leader that if someone has ADHD, they're sensitive, very sensitive, and very feel criticism so deeply. Just being careful about how you communicate.
That would be really, that is an amazing tip.
Yeah. Right? It's about making people feel safe, secure, like you said before, but even more so So when I shared about my podcast in that meeting, it was so cool because I felt really nervous and scared about it. And then people came up to me afterwards. I'm like, actually, I'm about to go and do that as well. And so many wonderful conversations. And what that has led to is more connection. Yeah. And that leads to a better workplace culture. People are feeling safe, better relationships, better communication, honesty and transparency. And then you're learning all of these ways of, being able to lead better.
Well, what you just described with you sharing your story is backed up by research around team performance and team cohesiveness. Is if somebody, particularly if they're the leader, you weren't in this instance, but if people have the courage to share, to be vulnerable and to say, hey, this is my struggle or this is my experience, it builds trust. It doesn't take it away. It builds connection. It makes the team feel closer. In high trust teams, you will see this sort of behavior around, I've made a mistake. This is what I'm struggling with. These are my strengths and these are my weaknesses. I've suffered from burnout. I have ADHD, have suffered from depression. That courage to disclose personally in most instances, and it has to be leader-led, it has to have that level of trust, can actually build a better working relationship.
Real talk, no fluff.